Good morning.
Hey, good morning. It's
Good
good to see you.
morning.
Good morning, Miller. Good morning, Paula. Good to see y'all.
I want to say it's good to see you too, but I'm having a hard time sleeping these days and I want to still be in bed.
That's
I
so
hear that.
fun.
I'm sorry.
This aging thing gets more and more interesting.
Mm.
I don't mean to brag, but I got 8 hours of sleep last night and it felt like winning the lottery. It was like, whoa.
It
I
was
woke
so
Well,
up.
nice.
these days I'll go 2 or 3 nights and sleep great and then have one night where I am awake all night long.
Oof.
And
Yuck.
I don't know what it is.
Mm.
No sleep for the wicked and the righteous don't need none, is what I always heard.
Well, I'm afraid I might fall on the wicked end.
It's not a great saying because I really like
Nobody
sleep.
sleep.
I,
Yeah.
I really like sleep. I remember as it's funny being a kid when I didn't want to go to sleep, you
I
know.
totally believe sleep is a spiritual discipline.
Oh yeah. I'm I'm
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
Is Rob coming today?
Yes, he is. He's finishing up, getting ready. I think I hear him coming.
Looks like you had fun in the Leafs this week.
Yeah, yeah, man. Those like I don't know if I don't think I ever saw a big leaf maple before I moved here. But
Oh,
like their leaves are
It's
like bigger than my face. They're so big.
the pictures
But
are
like
beautiful. Yeah.
oh. Yeah. And the pile just keeps getting bigger. So
we have accursed pine trees all over our front yard. So we don't get a whole lot of the beautiful leaves falling in the yard, but I do get to rake my own pine straw and put it around the shrubbery and don't have to pay for it.
That's good. That's good. I
yeah.
I go past my neighbors sometimes and think if because a lot of it falls in the street. I think I could come out here and just sweep it off the street, but that would probably look weird. But it would be there's a lot of
I
pine straw out there.
I wouldn't hesitate.
Right.
Yeah.
They probably thank you.
Yeah.
Right now we have got an absolutely huge oak tree laying in our front yard. It died, and
Oh,
Joe convinced the power company they needed to cut it down because it was hanging over a main electrical line. So they cut it down, but then they didn't cut it up and carry it off.
oh,
Yeah, so probably a month's worth of work doing that.
wow. That sounds like Alabama Power. We'll just leave this here in
Yeah.
your yard.
Well, it's not affecting them now. It was before.
Right.
It can't fall up.
Hmm.
Someone could set it on fire and it would be a big enough fire to melt the electrical lines over
That's
it.
true. That's true. They should really come out and fix that. Yeah. Good morning, Rob.
Morning.
So I don't know if Tony's going to be joining us. I saw that he was traveling. I'm going to need to end a little bit before 11 because I've got two things. I have a webinar and we have guests coming at 11. So too many things scheduled on this fine Sunday. So let's go ahead and get rolling. Excuse me. So I tell you what, let's do it this way. If uh Miller, can you be the liturgist?
Sure.
And Paula, can you be voice of the people?
Yes.
And then Rob, if you'll do the Hebrew Bible reading, I'll do the New Testament reading.
Okay.
All good? Pardon me. Here we go. Let's see. And I have the wrong verse numbers listed, but the text is correct on the New Testament reading. So and
Welcome. Oh, sorry.
and it's also November 19th and not the 12th. Ah,
Oh,
I hate it once I see it. It's like, I looked
I
over it
would
and I was
not
like,
have
that's
noticed. I don't
this
know
is
what day it
actually
is.
November the 19th. If you're watching this in the future and you're wondering, anyway.
Is the event accurate for November the 19th?
Yes, everything else
Okay.
is accurate. Until I find the next thing that I got wrong. So
All right. Well, welcome. On this day, November 19th, in 1969, Pete Conrad and Alana Bean became the third and fourth
I
human
think you mean
beings.
Alan Bean. That's definitely
Oh,
Alan
that's
Bean.
Alan Bean. It's not Alana. Although it would have
dang it.
been
I mean, that's very
cool.
hopeful.
Very
It would have been cool.
progressive.
This is from watching the new Apple series about the retro future if the Russians had beat us to the moon. And no, actually it's not because of that. It's just because I made a typo. But
Okay.
Okay.
All right. On this day,
Sorry.
November 19th, in 1969, Pete Conrad and Alan Bean became the third and fourth human beings to walk on the moon as part of the Apollo 12 program. Today is also the birthday in 1700 of Jean-Antoine Noyet, a French priest who discovered osmosis and, with the help of other monks, illustrated various principles of electricity. He was one of many religious leaders who were also scientists during the Enlightenment. When many people believed that since God is the author of truth, religious people shouldn't fear scientific discovery.
Yeah.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
The responsive reading is from Psalm 123. I raise my eyes to you, you who rule heaven.
Just as the eyes of servants attend to their master's hand,
just as the eyes of a female servant attend to her mistress' hand.
That's how our eyes attend to the Lord our God until he has mercy on us.
Have mercy on us, Lord.
Have mercy because we've had more than enough shame.
We've had more than enough mockery from the self-confident.
More than enough shame from the proud.
The Hebrew Bible reading comes from Judges. After Ehud had died, the Israelites again did things the Lord saw as evil. So the Lord gave them over to King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, and he was stationed in Harosheth Hagoyim. The Israelites cried out to the Lord because Sisera had 900 iron chariots and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was a leader of Israel at that time. She would sit under Deborah's palm tree between Ramah and Bethel in the Ephraim highlands, and the Israelites would come to her to settle disputes. She sent word to Barak, Abinoam's son, from Kedesh in Naphtali, and said to him, Hasn't the Lord, Israel's God, issued you a command? Go and assemble at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 men from the people of Naphtali and Zebulun with you. I'll lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, to assemble with his chariots and troops against you at the Kishon River, and then I'll help you overpower him.
Our New Testament reading is from Matthew 25, verse 14 and following. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who was leaving on a trip. He called his servants and handed his possessions over to them. To one he gave 5, it says valuable coins, but that's not a good translation. We're going to say talents, just because that's more accurate. And to another he gave 2, and to another he gave 1. He gave to each servant according to that servant's ability. Then he left on his journey. After the man left, the servant who had 5 talents took them and went to work doing business with them. He gained 5 more. In the same way, the one who had 2 gained 2 more, but the servant who had received 1 dug a hole in the ground and buried his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The one who had received 5 came forward with 5 additional ones. He said, Master, you gave me 5 talents. Look, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, excellent. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come celebrate with me. The second servant also came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2, and look, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done. You are a good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I'll put you in charge of much. Come celebrate with me. Now the one who had received 1 came and said, Master, I knew that you are a hard man. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. So I was afraid, and I hid my valuable coin in the ground. Here, you have what's yours. His master replied, you evil and lazy servant. You knew that I harvest grain where I haven't sown and that I gather crops where I haven't spread seed. In that case, you should have turned my money over to the bankers so that when I returned, you could give me what belonged to me with interest. Therefore, take from him the valuable coin and give it to the one who has 10. Those who have much will receive more, and they will have more than they need. But as for those who don't have much, even the little bit they have will be taken away from them. Now take this worthless servant and throw him out into farthest darkness. People there will be weeping and grinding their teeth. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
The history of colonialism is the story of domination by those who benefit from a dead earth vision of more for the few. For a very long time, we have been seduced into believing that only the exploitation model is real. The indigenous option, we have enough that we can share, has been denigrated as primitive, simplistic, or naive. We have been recruited into a spiritual Ponzi scheme that hides the fact that this worldview is not sustainable. Who is naive here? The culture that still believes the earth cannot die, or the culture that believes she is as real as you or me? And that is from Stephen Charleston's We Survived the End of the World.
Thank you. Which I've just started reading, by the way. It's a really good book. Bishop Stephen Charleston is a indigenous elder and bishop in the Episcopal Church. So we'll go to God in a time of prayer. I'll get us started. And those of you who are watching, if you're streaming on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to share prayer requests in the comments. Also, if you're streaming, just type where you're watching from. That gives us a way to count you. Lets us know that you were here. I guess I will keep an eye on YouTube. Will someone else keep an eye on Facebook for prayer requests?
Yeah, I'll log into Facebook.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, let's go to God in prayer. God of mercy, of love, and of new creation, we give you thanks that you are not like an irate businessman who gathers where you haven't sown, but instead that you sow your abundance all over the world. We pray for those places and situations where your abundance has been turned into scarcity for the enrichment of a few. We pray for those places where there is conflict, whether that is overt and physical, like in Gaza, in West Bank in Israel, and in Ukraine, or whether that conflict is covert, like the grinding violence of poverty in the rest of the world. We ask you, Lord, that you will open our eyes to your abundance, that you will stop the games of scarcity that we play that enrich a few at the expense of the many. We lift up to you ourselves and our hurt and ask for healing for our bodies, our spirits, our communities, and for the world. We ask for your healing grace to touch our lives and for it to have the ripple effect that where one is healed, more are healed. We lift up to you our own concerns and situations and the people who are close to us, and I invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer concerns.
For Lindsay Jones and her family.
Lord,
Lord,
hear our prayer. For the family and friends of Nathan Gay, whose life was celebrated this weekend,
Lord, hear our prayer.
and for those with chronic health conditions and for caregivers.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Thanksgiving for the coming rain.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for time to spend with Rob's parents.
Lord,
Lord,
hear our prayer.
And for LGBT folks as the holidays come up.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Anne Marich.
Lord, hear our prayer. Gracious God, for those that we've named and those who remain unnamed, and for the prayers we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear, that you answer, and we join with Jesus in his prayer for the world and for us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So, excuse me. I'm aware as I was looking at YouTube that there's actually a pretty big delay between where we are in Zoom and where YouTube is coming through. So if you are streaming on YouTube and I missed your prayer request, go ahead and type it in and we'll pray at the end because there's a pretty strong time delay. This is the largest one I've seen, actually. So anyway, it's great to have you all here. Thanks for tuning in. This is we've actually talked about this parable before when we weren't talking about this parable, because we've been looking at parables the last couple of weeks. And this is one that I remember hearing as a child and having serious problems with. The traditional way of interpreting this has been called the parable of the talents. And the traditional interpretation is such a part of our culture that even the word talent has come to mean skills or abilities or cultivated strengths that you have, right? Because for centuries, people have read this as pretty much a straightforward allegory. God gives us all gifts, skills, abilities, and then we choose to do certain things with them. And it's a little bit ableist because some of us, have more abilities than others. And we by working hard and practicing, we get better at things, and that's our offering to God, which I want to say, in one sense, is not necessarily a bad interpretation, because we do have an abundance of things, whether we're talking material things or whether we're talking about spiritual gifts. And I think part of human experience, human devotion, is to grow, to mature, and to cultivate our talents. But that reading has come under increasing scrutiny, and I'm really glad, because I remember reading this as a child and getting really angry. Why, if God gave someone one thing, listen to this end, even what little you have will be taken away and given to someone who has more. And that this was presented as, well, this is the way God works. which doesn't sound like a God who sits 5,000 people down on a hillside and says, share your food, and then everyone has enough. This sounds like a God of stinginess. So increasingly, scholars have looked at this and said, this is probably not the way the first century Christians would have heard this. For one thing, I don't know why the Common English Bible translates this as valuable coin, like 5 valuable coins, and 1 valuable coin. When the word that's been traditionally interpreted as talent is like, this is like years wages. This is tremendous amount of wealth. So someone who has a talent, that's like millions of dollars. 1 talent is really, really expensive. And the text says this guy's going on a trip. He called his servants. He handed his possessions over to them. Everything he owns, he's giving to these servants, right? And we're talking millions and millions of dollars. Now, people in the first century, if they heard about this ridiculous amount of wealth, they would not have had initially a high opinion of the person who was leaving on the trip. Because people in the first century did not equate wealth with hard work and success, because there's only one way you got that amount of money, and that was by being born into it. Like, they did not live in a meritocracy where people felt like if they just worked really hard, they would get more money. People who had this amount of wealth had it for one reason: they owned land, and everyone else didn't. This is someone who's extremely wealthy. This is like Elon Musk, as I've said before. This is someone who has a ridiculous amount of money, and the general feeling about this person would not have been positive. The people listening to this story would have been like, how many millions of dollars is he leaving with these servants? And so then, not only do the servants take the money, but they double it. Now, I don't know what kind of investments you guys make in the stock market or mutual funds or CDs, but I don't get 100% return on my investment for anything unless I'm a drug dealer. I mean, or unless I'm involved in some kind of shady business. You're not making 100% interest. So the people hearing this, like, 100% interest, oh my God, what are these servants doing? Now, David Buttrick, my homiletics professor, many years ago, pointed out that most likely the business that these people were involved in was tax farming. Now, you're used to hearing tax collectors and how tax collectors are always kind of bad guys in the Gospels. Tax farming is is a euphemism. It's extortion. Okay, and the way that tax farming worked in the ancient world, and pardon me if I've shared this before, but Caesar, the head dictator, the head criminal, would say to his subordinates, I want you to collect this much money from these places, and people would bid on how much money they could raise from a certain area. So basically, let's imagine that that's the way it worked in the United States government. I might, if I were already wealthy, if I were already a billionaire, I might say to the dictator, hey, I can raise $80 million from Alabama. I know that's really low, but I can't think in millions and billions. Anyway, I can raise 80 million from my home state. And the emperor would say, okay, go raise 80 million. And then I would in turn solicit bids from other people. And they would try to bid on how much money they could get out of their neighborhoods. So this was someone who had an intimate knowledge of what was going on in their community, essentially saying, I can extract this much coin from these people. Now, if I can't get that, then I have to make up the difference. But if I can get enough, then I can skim off the top, and then I only have to pass on to you what I've bid. See, it's a brilliant way. It's extortion. So likely these servants were involved in extortion. This is probably tax farming or something similar. That's the only way you're going to raise 100% interest. Now, the last servant has this reaction. When he's called after he sees his two fellow servants being rewarded for whatever shady business they were in, he comes up and he says, I was afraid. I knew that you are a hard man. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. So I was afraid. Okay, so right off, we got to stop and ask, is this God? Is the wealthy man God? Miller's voting. No, this can't be God. And also, listen, you also hearing the business they're involved in. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You not only did you not plant, this isn't your land. You harvest grain where you haven't sown. You gather crops where you haven't spread seed. He's telling us the business this guy is involved in. So I was afraid. Darn right you were afraid. And so I hid your money in the ground. Here, you have what's yours. Now, some people have said, actually, the last servant is showing nonviolent resistance to a system that he knows is exploitive. That's not a bad interpretation. Basically, I'm going to give you what you entrusted to me, but I'm not going to participate in gathering where I haven't sown and harvesting where I haven't done the work. That's not my business. And the master responds punitively, takes his stuff away and gives it to the others. Now, some people, modern people reading this parable have said, basically, this is a model of the world. This is not a model of the kingdom of heaven. And that what Jesus is holding up is the system that we do not want to be part of, right? The idea that God is going to, our model of God is that God has sown in abundance, that God has filled the world with an abundance, and that it's meant to be shared. Not that it's meant to be hoarded or, in this process, taken from some and accumulated with the wealthy. Essentially, Jesus is saying the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And this is the way the world works. And this story, which initially pulls us in to say, oh, this is the way the kingdom of heaven works, flips it around and say, this is not the kingdom of heaven. This is not a good description of that. Now, I want to tell you, I struggle a bit because I don't actually know which interpretation Matthew or Jesus intended. And remember, Matthew is reporting something that Jesus said, and probably this is probably a Jesus story. Did Jesus mean it this way? Did Matthew hear it one way and flip it around and try to interpret it the way in the traditional mode? What did Jesus mean when he was saying this parable? I do think the key part in here for me, the part that I feel certain, is that when the frightened servant says these things, we are supposed to say, this is not who God is. God is not a hard person who gathers where he hasn't sown. Now, I think from there, the interpretation hinges on whether we think, yes, this is a description of the present world, and the servant is frightened because he understands the way the world works, or is it showing us that when we think God is a terrible being, that we act as though God is a terrible being? I think this parable can support either of those readings. But again, like last week, I'm coming to you telling you, I don't know. I don't have a place that I feel on firm footing and to land on this parable. What I do know is that the frightened servant is not describing the God that I believe in. So I'm going to pause there and invite your responses. Yeah, go ahead, Miller. You got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm really struck in this moment about the sorry, my kid is playing bubble wrap.
Mhm.
I'm struck in this moment, the line that one can draw between this parable and when Jesus is talking about, rendering to Caesar what is Caesar's, holding up a coin, which I know these aren't individual coins, although isn't it great that like our capitalist forebears really wanted us to think about like being given one coin and you know, making so much of it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, but I feel like an interpretation of this parable could be to not buy in, because you know, all obviously the other two servants, they were all in. They, you know, they wanted to be a part of the system and perpetuate the harm that this big rich guy had probably done, if what the servant says is true, the third servant says is true. And then the the third guy is like, well, I'm going to be a part of it, but I'm going to try to do the right thing. And then, you know, the hammer comes down.
Yeah.
And I think about the things that Jesus did do in protest and like as a community, like healing people and feeding people, you know, and that's not exactly like, well, I'm going to take the government's money or, you know, Rome's money or whatever and like do good things with it, or, you know, do my best. You know, it's maybe an encouragement to be completely separate from the, you know, the whole idea. You know?
Yeah, thank you. So seeing this as a form of protest, or again, like you're saying, I like connecting it to the give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Like, all right, buddy, here's what you get. This is yours. Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
So just to kind of continue that, I guess, that chain of thought, like what really jumped out at me, I mean, the way you describe the feeling when you know the third servant is saying, I know you're a hard man and you do these things, you know, you reap where you haven't sowed, right? Like basically telling him his business back to him, you know, I'm just thinking, you've been handed gargantuan sum of money, right, entrusted with it, and you know who you work for. So like part of it has got to be that he's also petrified of losing it. Right. And like, I guess I'm really, so, you know, the in sort of looking back to the more traditional interpretation of the parable and thinking about how much a talent really is. I've always sort of latched onto the idea that it's, you know, as you're pointing out, I mean, it's, you know, millions of dollars, maybe it's $1 million, whatever it is. It's like all the money somebody might make in a lifetime. And for that reason, I also like to think of it as a sort of a symbol of like, well, what is your life's work? What did you do with your life? What did you make? Right. And so when we have that in mind and come to this, you know, much more questioning sort of interpretation, right? It really strikes me the salience of the whole idea of like, well, those who have lots will get more, and others will have what even little they've got will be taken away. Like the system will reward who feed Moloch, and for everyone else, damned if you do, damned if you don't, because you know, like you don't want to have a relationship with the Godfather at all.
Right.
You want to stay out of that. You don't want him to do you a favor. You don't want him to owe you anything. You don't want him to know you exist.
Right.
Right. Like, because either you're going to make him mad because you didn't do it right, or you're going to make him mad because you lost money, or you're going to be complicit in doing awful things. Congratulations, you won the lottery. You're going to be an awful suffering person no matter what.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I have to say, really feels like it supports, you know, the reading Miller is putting out there. That there's an encouragement here to really think hard about how do you not get sucked into that.
Right.
I mean, the tax farming thing even made me think about like multi-level marketing kind of schemes, right? Like this is all Caesar's downline.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and actually, as you were saying that, it made me also think about connecting this to the parable of the dishonest manager, right? I mean, one thing you could do with that $1 million is you could just give it to a lot of people who will take you in after you're fired. You know, just share it out amongst the, hey, I'm gonna do this knowing you're gonna get fired. Just spread it around.
I mean, I'm really thinking about the parable last week too. So I mean, whether it's dishonest manager or, you know, the parable of the panicking bridesmaids, or this one. Like, it feels like there's a genre here of scarcity parables.
Yeah.
And we struggle with them because they seem to be really at odds with things Jesus actually does.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to sort of consider them all as a genre and think about what's going on here, where
Maybe
probably
that's the
the
point, you
idea
know?
is the interrogation of the idea of the scarcity in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Paula. I see you had your hand up.
Uh, Rob, I'm glad you mentioned The Godfather, because the whole time Dave was talking about this man, I was thinking Tony Soprano. And you had to be really brave to walk up to Tony Soprano and say, I know you're a hard man. And
Yeah.
so this may not have been a great financial manager, but he was definitely courageous. And taking in mind that I have not slept all night long, the last verse in that, wasn't that anyone to whom much is given, from them much will be expected?
I don't think so. No, not in this one, but it's very close.
Okay.
Those who have will receive. Those who have much will receive more, and they will have more than they need. But as for those who don't have much, even a little bit they have will be taken away from them. Yeah.
Those who have much, well, that anyone to whom much is given, much will be expected. The one who had much was the owner of all the head honcho. And much was expected of him before anybody else. And it seems like he didn't give much. It seems like he was a taker totally.
Ooh.
So I look at statistics on who gives to charities and who supports churches, and 10% of people in a church give 90% of the financing for it. And those 10% aren't normally the wealthiest people in the church. They're the widows and the retired couples and the people just barely eking by. And they're so much more generous than somebody who's got so much that they're afraid to lose it.
Yeah.
And, maybe if you're given much, you might receive much back financially, but I have to believe that you also receive a whole lot more heartache and worry and fear. And those who are more generous are actually going to be the ones who benefit from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's still current, but at one point the research was that people in the lower income brackets tend to give 4% of their income away. Middle income is like 2%, and upper income brackets is like less than 1%. So yeah, Rob, go ahead.
Paula, just as you were laying that out there, you made me think more about the whole Godfather thing, and the idea that, like, there's there's different things you can be generous with, and some of them aren't good.
Yes.
I'm just thinking about, what are these guys doing to double the money, right? Dave, you pointed out, like, okay, it's going to be really, really gross. But I mean, I'm just thinking about how the whole system functions. I mean, because extortion, I want to dissect the extortion here, right? Like, because I was talking about not wanting the Godfather to know you exist, not wanting him to do you a favor, not wanting to owe him a favor, right? Well, all of that sort of peddling and threats and leverage is exactly what's going on, and is exactly where these other talents would be coming from, right? It's, I'm willing to go say, oh, nice little farm you got here. It'd be a pity if anything happened to it. I'm willing to go, like, break your kneecap and be like, if you want to keep your leg, pay up. Like, you're being a terrifying, horrific person in order to extract this stuff. And the thing is, this is happening at so many layers. Like, so Paula, to your point about, like, having much expected of you, Caesar's got an empire to run. He's got to fund this machine, right? So, like, this whole thing of like, okay, I'm going to my guys, the people I can count on, and I'm saying, I need all of you to do your part, make yourselves rich, keep me in power, and this will all be good for all of us. At this point, this is basically Putin's system, right?
Yeah.
Then those guys have to go down to their downline and be like, okay, guys, here's how it's going to be. Here's what we got to get done. And it'll be great for you if you make it great for me. Right. And it just, the time it gets down to the last person, so much graft has been piled on top. So many threats have been made, veiled or otherwise. Right. Everybody's scared. Right. Even the people who have a lot are scared because what if they lose it? What if they can't make more? What if they can't pay back a favor? Right. Because at some point, you weren't able to get out everything that you needed. And you had to be like, I'm sorry. And the guy's like, it's okay. I'll cover you this time. You'll do me a favor later. And now that is around your neck for forever. Right. And I just see this Russian nesting doll, right? The Matryoshka doll or whatever, of just like so much extortion and suffering inside of each other, where it just goes on forever. It's an infinite regression of awfulness. And so I want to read Teresa's comment.
Yes.
Because she says, yep, I think that it does feel an awful lot like life is like this. The ultra wealthy keep on accumulating and the poor will be damned. Hi, climate change. Grappling with breaking out of this pattern is a challenge. Jesus is so hard on the oppressive rich. How could the moral match up with God is the ultimate one percenter?
Absolutely. That makes it feel really icky when you say it that way. I think that's really good. I want to respond, Paula. So yeah, the verse you quoted a minute ago is from, I had to look it up, is Luke 12:48, and it's kind of also appropriate to what you were just sharing, Rob. It's that slave who knew what his master wanted but did not prepare himself or do what was wanted will receive a severe beating, but the one who did not know and did what deserved a beating will receive a light beating. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. Which, again, hearing it from that perspective, I used to think, oh, from one who has been given much, much will be required. Okay, well, I'm, middle class, white, well, dude, that's a good thing for me. I've been entrusted with a lot. I got to work hard. Except, regardless, you're going to get a beating. Like, I mean, so it's like everyone gets a beating. The beatings will continue until morale improves. Woohoo! I mean, it really is.
And until the GDP goes up.
It's the threat looming over all this, right? Like, make money or I'll kick your butt. I mean, that's really, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you for that. I saw how that was connected. Go ahead, Miller.
I wanted to read Camille's comment, but you just reminded me of this comedy sketch that I saw online the other day. It was a guy who had immigrated from China, just moved in, and two guys come with suits to his doorstep, and they're like, "Do you know or do you follow Jesus Christ?" And he says, "No." and he says, and then they say, "Well, if you don't follow Jesus Christ, then you're going to go to hell." And then he says, but what about all the other people in China who don't follow Jesus Christ? There's billions, And the guy says, well, they won't go to hell because they don't know, but you know now. And then he's like, why did you tell me?
Right. Exactly. It's like some sort of like horror movie where you get exposed to the thing, like, I don't know, was it The Ring? What you see the thing and now you have to pass it on or else you'll be killed. Right?
You watch the evangelical tape. You have to get somebody else to watch it. It's like those little tracks.
It is.
Jack chick tracks.
That's right. Now that you've seen it, now you've got to show it to somebody else or you'll die. What a terrible gift to give somebody.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I think so. I really am glad. I mean, Paul, you bringing up that verse, and when I went and looked for it, I was like, man, that's like another one, but it's such a nice tie-in. Everyone gets a beating, a light beating, severe beating. Aim for a light beating. That's the moral of the story. Just aim for the lightest beating you can get. Oh boy. Hear the good news. Well, I want to point out, like, that's like part of that is, I mean, when we start pushing on this a little bit, instead of just saying, okay, well, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, right? When we start looking at the details, which I think if you love the Bible, you should look at the details. I taught introduction to Bible at Samford a few times, and one of the criticisms I got from students, often who I mean, I was introducing historical critical reading of the Bible. A lot of them are coming from more conservative backgrounds, and I'm recognizing the difficulty of this, and I'm not trying to just disabuse people or disillusion them with the Bible, but you start pushing on the details. You start reading it closely, and people will say you're reading it too closely. People who say, that you should read it literally, but not like that. It's you start pushing on some of these details, and suddenly things start opening up or breaking loose. I don't know how you want to put it. But in our liturgy, we say Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. That proves God's love for us. In the name of Jesus Christ, you are forgiven. Right? That's part of the communion liturgy. And it's interesting how little of that there is in this story, or in the beating slaves story. That's all hit me.
Yeah.
Miller, you were going to read Camille's comment.
Yeah, I was. Let me read Camille's comment. She says, I'd look at the old woman who gives out of her want as the counterpart, I assume, to this. Yeah. This reading has completely lifted up the prosperity gospel.
Oh, yeah, it has.
He also says, Rob, those that can't keep up the game get pushed off the building.
Yeah. And I think there's a little bit, so sometimes we talk about conventional wisdom and unconventional wisdom. I think, there's the conventional wisdom way of reading this, and there's truth to that, right? That I mean, part of the seductive thing about the prosperity gospel is that there's some truth to it, right? You sacrifice now for payoff later, right? And that's something we want people to learn, right? To order their values in such a way that, I make sacrifices now for a long-term payoff. I don't do the immediate gratification thing now so that later on there's something better that comes. Or I'm generous today, and the generosity, like karma, comes around, and I get a benefit from it. And that's conventional wisdom. And there's some truth to that. And then the unconventional wisdom is the opposite of that, right? Which is, yeah, some people work their butts off and never see a payoff. And how do we then as a community respond to that? And maybe one of the questions here in this situation is, what would have happened if all the servants talked together and came up with their own strategy? Right? Instead of it being a free-for-all, what if servant 1, 2, and 3 got together and said, what should we do with this? This is our chance. I don't know. I'm thinking of like revolutionary here. Like, this is our chance. We could give all this away. I don't know. Like, what would have happened if they had all just said, let's do this. Let's throw a gigantic party with this, with this $10 million, and spend it all while the master's gone. I don't know. That, I don't know. It gets dangerously close to the vineyard parable, I guess. But anyway, others. Oh, you're muted, Rob.
I tried to unmute and then it went back to mute.
Oh.
I like what Miller said in the chat. All the servants buried the money in different places and then refused to dig it up. I thought, well, maybe they just forgot where they buried it. And suddenly I thought of Fargo.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
I feel like there's a really strong connection between this parable and Fargo. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I don't mean to end us early, but I do have guests arriving. And I've really enjoyed the conversation. Why don't we go ahead and wrap up? I feel like that's a good place to end. I think coming away from this, the one thing I'm pretty certain of is that God is not like this person in the parable. And I'm really glad that I've read that piece by Stephen Charleston about how and again, this is a good book. I'm enjoying it, but about how different the Native American understanding of ownership is. Like, we don't own anything. We don't own anything, right? It all goes back in the box in the end. We pass it on to somebody else. Anyway, so let's go ahead and close. If I can find my liturgy. There it is.
The closing prayer is from Teresa of Avila. How great is your goodness, dear Lord. Blessed are you forever. May all created things praise you, O God, for loving us so much that we can truthfully speak of your fellowship with mankind, even in his earthly exile. And however virtuous we may be, our virtue always depends on your great warmth and generosity, dear Lord. Your bounty is infinite. How wondrous are your works. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all for tuning in today to our online house church worship. Again, if you've been watching on Facebook or YouTube, please click like or just comment with where you're watching from. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. Those of you on Zoom, you can hang out for just a minute more.